In the words of Sosuke Aizen, the vast majority of the Gotei 13's firepower can be found in its 13 captains that lead it. And if you ask me, that makes total sense, as we've seen a bunch of examples throughout the Bleach storyline that really showcase the captains as being on a totally different level to virtually every other Shinigami that helps to make up this organization. And across the course of the Bleach timeline, we have seen numerous iterations of the Gotei 13 itself, each one varying wildly in terms of its overall strength, depending on who is in charge at the time. After all, captains and vice-captains change hands intermittently. Sometimes they'll bring in brand new faces, other times they'll resurrect familiar ones to fill in a void or a vacancy. And of course, the individual division's standings will change in line with the changes made to personnel. However, today I'm here to tell you that I think the final version of the Gotei 13 we see in the series, the one at the end of the final arc, going into the Hell chapter, the current one, is the weakest Gotei 13 we have ever seen in the series so far. Now, how can I make such a claim as that, knowing full well that this current version of the Gotei 13 has some of the biggest powerhouses known to Bleach within its ranks? Well, in this video, I want to take a closer look at this final version of the Gotei 13 and the final set of captains and vice-captains we see in the story, pick it apart, analyze it, compare it to its predecessors, and try and reach that conclusion that is the idea that this is the weakest one to date. Before we begin the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well, as it does help support me and the channel, as it hopefully gets us more traction on the YouTube algorithm. And if you really like what I do here and you want to support me another step further, I do have a Patreon for my channel as well. You can support me there, you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month. To everyone who is already doing that, who's already a patron of the channel, they're coming up on screen right now for a massive shout out. Thank you, each and every one of you, for supporting me and helping me do what I love. So after making such a claim as saying the current Gotei 13 is the weakest of them all, where do you begin in backing that up and unraveling that? Well, in my opinion, the best place to begin, the fairest place, is by looking at the current Gotei 13 as it stands. That seems like the most natural starting point to me. And of course, to do that, there will be massive spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc to follow, as that arc is obviously crucial for truly understanding the position the current Gotei 13 is in. So in my opinion, generally speaking, from a story and world-building perspective, it makes a ton of sense for this current Gotei 13 to be the quote-unquote weakest of the lot. That's genuinely not a knock against this lineup of captains and vice-captains. They're obviously incredibly powerful in their own right, but it makes sense for this to be the weakest. This is a post-war Gotei 13, the likes of which we have never really seen before. A Gotei 13 that has been through the ringer and come out the other side a totally changed entity. Of course, there have been big battles and wars in Bleach before, but perhaps my biggest criticism of them is that they didn't inflict enough damage on the Gotei, they didn't inflict enough necessary change and evolution, and the Gotei 13 as a faction remained mostly stagnant for a large part of the story. That is not the case with the 1000-Year Blood War. There are captains dying left, right and centre, vice-captains dying or getting taken out, positions having to be swapped in. The entire hierarchy of the Gotei 13 feels like it is upended in this arc in the most effective and successful way. Whereas with the Arrancar arc, most captains and vice-captains, that upper crust of the Soul Society, really the only fighters involved in the battle against Aizen, come out of it the other side relatively unscathed. Of course, they were injured, some of them more seriously than others, but by the time all is said and done, the dust has settled. The Gotei 13 is basically in the same place it was before, albeit perhaps even stronger than it was before, thanks to the arrival of 3 new captains to fill the spaces left by the traitors. And so, in direct contrast to that, you have the Gotei 13 as it stands after the massive war against the Quincy's, which more than anything else in the series feels like an actual battle with high stakes. And it's for that reason that I'm perfectly happy with the Gotei 13 as it appears right now. I like seeing change really showcased like that in the world. The world shows you how it has been forced to adapt due to the circumstances, and the Gotei 13 is a great example of that. It is very different now to how it was before the final arc, and that might be to its detriment overall. So then, to go in a bit more detail about this current Gotei 13 and how it really does stack up in terms of overall strength, I would say it is the weakest, but there are about 5 captains truly propping up the current Gotei 13, in my opinion. The first of which, of course, is the new Captain Commander Kyoraku Shunsui, who really puts it all on the line in the Thousand Year Blood War, and you really see what he is well and truly made of, both from a power standpoint, but also from a tactics, intelligence, and just everything coming together to make the ultimate commander for the worst possible situation. And Kyoraku is easily in one of the best and strongest places he has ever been, and if he's going to be anything like his former father figure Yamamoto, he still has a long way to go as well. Then there are characters like Byakuya Kuchiki, who of course returned from his training in the Royal Palace in the final arc more powerful than he had ever been before, with a Shikai now so overwhelming it actually resembles his Bankai. Characters like Hitsugaya Toshiro, who has apparently matured and mastered his Bankai, allowing him to take on a new adult form with untold abilities, allowing him to take on even Gerard Valkyrie. And speaking of which, another captain who was able to do that is, of course, the behemoth himself, Kenpachi Zaraki, who is in a greater position in this current Gotei than he has ever been before, going on a journey of self-discovery in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, unlocking both Shikai and Bankai in probably record time, it feels like, and really just unlocking a new tier of power that he feels like he hasn't known before, and really is breaching the highest echelon of strength in the Soul Society. And the final captain, I would say, is basically prepping up the current Gotei is Mayuri Kurotsuchi. While he hasn't really changed as much as those ones I have kind of mentioned up until this point, his general nature, his unpredictability, the fact that he's able to counter anything, his amazing intellect, means that he's always going to be an asset. Add to the fact that he has completely modified and transformed his Bankai, and he is more of a threat now than he ever was. Those are the captains that I think are really carrying this current Gotei 13 on their back, and together they do paint a picture of real power, and I don't think they can be underestimated at all. The problem that lies with this version of the Gotei 13 is in the captains that we haven't really mentioned. Virtually half of this Gotei 13's captaincy is either unproven or potentially not all that powerful at all, filling spaces merely out of necessity, which again is not a knock against them. I like seeing that progression. I like seeing them stepping in to the shoes of their fallen comrades, but it does mean that we now have captains here who certainly, it would seem, don't have anywhere near the same level of strength or experience as the rest. Before we get to the lowest kind of rung of captains here, I want to go over a couple more that I would argue seem to be kind of mid-tier. We have Soifon, who of course is another kind of retro captain, it feels like. She's been around since the start of the story, but in my opinion she is like thoroughly left behind. Compared to those 5 that I mentioned earlier, Soifon is really left behind. And unfortunately for her, she just doesn't showcase that same growth. Now, there is growth here. She masters her Shunko, she gets Mukyu Shunko, and that is clearly an impressive ability, but in my opinion, it's just nothing like what the others were able to showcase in the final arc. Then there's the brand new captain of the 13th Division, Rukia Kuchiki, who in my opinion was captain level prior to becoming captain for a while. Obviously, her being essentially the deuter agonist for a large period of the story means that she gets a chance to really show what she can do. Whether that's killing the Fraction D-Roy in a single hit, or taking on the Espada Aranero and finishing him off, right the way up to killing the Stern Ritter who nearly finished off her brother, Asnot. Rukia has an impressive resume of wins under her belt, and so she more than fits the necessary requirements to becoming a captain, and looking fairly impressive at the same time. Rukia, in my opinion, perfectly is deserving of that spot, and what she kind of lacks in experience as a captain, she makes up for in her abilities, her strength, and everything she has showcased so far. So that's about 7 captains down, and in my opinion, they're all, fairly impressive, ranging from very, very strong and like I said, carrying this whole group to kind of the couple of mid-tier ones. Then we get to the captains who it is considerably more nebulous and considerably more difficult to really ascertain what kind of position they hold in this current version of the Gotei. And unfortunately, 3 of those we can knock off right off the bat, being the Vizard replacement captains. Shinji, Rose, and Kensei are by no means weak. And let's get that right out of the way immediately. These guys should theoretically be extremely powerful. You know, they are all Shinigami Hollow hybrids, all who have Bankai. Shinji's Bankai is so broken he can't use it in the Soul Society. And yet, within the canon story itself, the 74 volumes of Bleach, these guys do and achieve basically nothing. They look worse, they look weaker than characters like Rukia, who really steps up to the plate, and in my opinion, they are letting the side down. No matter what their prospective strength might be, if they never show it, if they never utilize it, how useful really are they? Kensei and Rose actually come up against a couple of Stern Ritter in the final arc, and they are bodied, manhandled pretty badly. It is embarrassing what happens to those characters, that Renji comes in and saves both of them and then kills their opponent, which just shows the growing power gap between some of these characters and some captains who it feels like are being left behind. And that's a real shame. Rose, as you guys probably know, is, I think, a character who is awesome. I really like this guy, but there's no denying that he either seems to get way kind of above himself and just kind of talk all the time, give everything away, which is a problem that all Vizards seem to suffer from. And Shinji is absolutely not weak, but he's also totally unproven in the canon story itself. He does like virtually nothing during his tenure as a captain, which is really hard to say and it's really hard to accept, but it is the truth. So while I wouldn't say these guys are by any means weak, by any means inexperienced, they have really yet to prove themselves on the battlefield. And then we come to the biggest kind of, I guess, issue with this current Gotei 13 being the totally unproven captains. An entire quarter of this Gotei 13 is made up of captains who have been promoted out of necessity, which again is fair, but have literally nothing under their belts. The current captain of the 4th Division, Isane Kotetsu, I'm sure she is impressive at healing, but really we see her do virtually nothing throughout the main storyline of Bleach. The current captain of the 7th Division, Tetsuzaimon Iba, again, I'm sure this guy is strong enough, but he's done absolutely nothing. Where so many vice captains get a chance to shine at least once, it's funny that Isane and Iba end up in captain's positions because they are 2 of the vice captains in my eyes that never do anything. And that's a crying shame. And then the current captain of the 8th Division is Lisa Yadomaru, another one of these Vizards who have been brought in to help out with a situation that they were needed in, but who has shown virtually nothing in the series. And that's a shame again, because Lisa should theoretically be very powerful. And so what you have here is a Gotei 13 that is more polarized than I have ever seen, where at least the previous Goteis seem to be in many ways quite consistent. This Gotei is really juxtaposed between a set of captains that seem to be very powerful and then another half of captains that seem to be almost useless or totally unproven in battle. And that makes for an incredibly uneven Gotei, and this problem extends to the current set of vice captains as well. Now, while the captains, in my opinion, are virtually split straight down the middle, the vice captains is a little bit more of a mixed bag. There's a bit more going on here than there is with the captains. There are some vice captains who are so powerful that once again they are seemingly carrying nearly everyone on their backs. Renji, Hisagi, and I would argue Ikkaku is probably up there as well. Renji is so powerful at this point in the story that he is probably more powerful than the latter half of captains in that list. Maybe that's hyperbolic, but it's definitely close. His battle against Masked Masculine basically proves that. Then you've got Hisagi, who of course now has Bankai at the end of the 1000 Year Blood War arc, and it's a very strong Bankai at that as well. He's also just a very powerful, very well-rounded vice captain in general, and of course Ikkaku, another one with Bankai, who's also just very, very strong and a very hardened warrior. It gets a little more nebulous with the vice captains, because you then have what I would consider tried and true vice captains who have shown their mettle in the story, but I wouldn't consider them to be as strong as that trinity. Being characters like Matsumoto, Hinomori, Izuru. These guys are... even Omaida could maybe make that list. You know, that guy, obviously, he's bumbling coward, but he has been shown to have genuine character development over time. So those guys, I would say, are the tried and true reliables of the vice captains. Then you have a bunch of kind of new vice captains, because once again, we've had to make room now for the people who were pushed up to the captaincy. There are loads of holes in the vice captaincy now that have been filled. Again, a couple of them out of necessity, with characters that are totally untested and completely unproven. The new vice captain of the 4th division is Kyone Kotetsu, and the new vice captain of the 13th division is Sentaro Kotsubaki. Two characters who up until this point have literally only been used as comic relief, and have done so little on screen that we don't even know what like their Shikai is or anything like that. We have no idea about what anything these characters can do. Another character, and this does pain me to say because I'm a big fan of this guy, who does fall into that kind of same bracket, is the new vice captain of the 12th division, Akon, who's replacing Nemu, who was killed in the Quincy Blood War. Akon, I'm trying not to be too biased because I do really like his character. He's a little different from the former third seats of the 13th division in that it always felt to me like Kubo was kind of grooming this character in the Thousand Year Blood War for a leadership role. Akon might not be much of a frontline fighter. Certainly we've never seen him do anything really like that. But I would argue his role in the first Quincy invasion, where he really takes the initiative, takes over the R&D department while Mayuri's on the front lines, acts without Mayuri's consent, but manages to get Ichigo into Soul Society, is a huge deal. And it's all that sort of thing. Akon suddenly gets a lot of screen time in the Thousand Year Blood War, and that felt to me like Kubo was prepping him for a leadership role. But make no mistake, he has still basically shown and done nothing. And then you have the, once again, unproven elements. We have two brand new vice captains in the series, being the new 7th Division vice captain Atao Rindo and the new 8th Division vice captain Yu Yayahara. Again, these guys could be really powerful, but they are unknown quantities at the moment. And so when you look at the current Gotei 13 from that all-encompassing viewpoint, it paints a picture of a team that is highly uneven, coming in at all different angles in terms of power, intelligence, experience, all these crucial things that certainly the newer, younger members will be able to build and gain over time, but right this minute, in the aftermath of the Thousand Year Blood War, this is the current state of the Gotei 13. Wildly inconsistent and not overly balanced. If we compare it to Gotei 13 iterations of the past then, and we have actually seen a few. Now, in my opinion, the most powerful of all of the Gotei 13 variations is the one we know basically nothing about. And that's because in the lore, it is said that the very first version of the Gotei 13 was the strongest, to the point where even Yhwach, the tyrannical Quincy warlord, feared them. And we know only that Yamamoto and Unohana served in that initial set of captains, and they were violent, monstrous, murderous thugs. So I'm happy with basically just envisioning that as this all-powerful version of the Gotei 13, but that also didn't really care much for the lore, for rules, and so eventually they became more civilized and probably mellowed out a bit as a result. That brings me to the first Gotei 13 that we actually see in this story. It has a lot of familiar faces in it, a lot of characters who are in the current version as well. Kyoraku, Byakuya, Hitsugaya, Kenpachi, Mayuri, Soifon. While these characters are all technically weaker here than they end up at the end of the series, that's still an impressive gamut of characters who have all shown and done something throughout the story. Then you replace the 3 current Vizard captains, with 3 captains that I would argue are considerably more powerful, impressive. Either way, they all do and prove a lot more, being, of course, the traitorous trio Aizen, Gin, and Tosen. And then, of course, you have old-timers, the old guard as well. Yamamoto, Unohana, Ukitake are all there as well. What that leaves us with in terms of the captains is, in my opinion, the most consistent version of the Gotei 13 we ever see in the series. I think this is the one that gets kind of everything right. It has monstrously heavy hitters in it, like Yamamoto, Kyoraku, Unohana, Aizen, Gin, Kenpachi, Byakuya, Toshiro, Mairi. I'm basically listing off everyone here. The only real quote-unquote weak links, I would say, in this Gotei are probably, unfortunately, my boy Komamura, but also characters like Soifon, like Tosen. But even then, calling them weak links is absurd, because they all do a lot on screen. We see it with our own eyes. They all wield great power. And so that's why, to me, this is probably the most consistent and the most powerful version of the Gotei that we get to properly see. Kyoraku and Ukitake under the same roof with their father figure Yamamoto. Unohana's there as well. Aizen, this is a monstrous, powerful force. Ironic that it's the force the Ryoka go up against in the Soul Society arc, but I would say this is the Gotei that you really do not want to mess with. That takes us into the Urankar arc, where we have the exact same version of the Gotei 13, but now just missing 3 captains. Aizen, Gin, and Tosen. And so you might be immediately like, well, surely that's the weakest version of the Gotei 13, but I would argue the inclusion of characters like Yamamoto, Unohana, Ukitake still means this is more powerful than the version we have at the very end of the series. That is potentially nebulous, up for debate. But I think that this kind of, not necessarily crippled, but injured version of the Gotei 13 that's prevalent throughout the Urankar arc still packs enough of a punch. And even where it comes to the vice captains as well, you've got characters like Chojuro Sasakibe, who ironically was nothing but a laughingstock for basically his entire time in the series, until we discovered he was an absolute monster. And so just having Chojuro there as opposed to not having him is immediately a huge boon for the Soul Society and Urankar arc versions of the Gotei 13. I'm not even sure. Maybe Renji is as powerful as Chojuro, but Chojuro's strength, since it was all delivered to us posthumously, is really hard to gauge. But Kubo threw a bunch of crazy statements at this character to make it seem like he was unbelievably powerful, learning and mastering Bankai before even Kyoraku and Ukitake did. I mean, that is crazy. So to me, Chojuro, again, I think is doing some serious heavy lifting here. Alongside Chojuro, this earlier version of the Gotei 13 has a couple of other vice captains too that are no longer present towards the end of the series, Nemu and Yachiru, and both of those guys are also quite powerful. So I would be inclined to say that this version of the Gotei in general, captains and vice captains, is still the biggest and the best. Only weakened in the Urankar arc, but I still think it's stronger than it appears at the end of the series. And that brings me to another Gotei 13 iteration that is difficult to place, in that I think it is perhaps the most unproven of them all, apart from, the original Gotei, being the Gotei 13 we see around Turn Back the Pendulum. This Gotei still features the heavy hitters, the likes of Yama, Shunsui, Unohana, and Ukitake, but it's replaced certain people. Yoruichi is there instead of Soifon. Ginrei is there instead of Byakuya. The 3 Vizard captains are there instead of Aizen, Gin, and Tosen. Where the Vizard captains are concerned, I would consider that a net negative. But in my opinion, Yoruichi has always been somewhat more impressive than Soifon, and Ginrei is a totally unknown quantity. So the Turn Back the Pendulum Gotei as a whole is very difficult to place, and where the vice captains are concerned, that's even more unknown variables. Characters like Chikane, Iba, Marenishin, Omaida, Jinemon, Kotsubaki, so many characters that we just have no idea about. But I would be inclined, inclined, purely speculative, to say that this is slightly weaker than the one we get in the Soul Society arc, mainly because of the appearance of Shinji, Rose, and Kensei, who don't even have their hollow powers yet at this point in the story. And you're losing out on Aizen and Gin and Tozen to get to that. So in my opinion, that makes sense to me that it wouldn't be quite as strong as the version of the Gotei we get in Soul Society arc. And so when you go back to the current version of the Gotei, like, what are they really missing here? Obviously, the first division is totally different now. In a way that I would argue, from a power standpoint, it is weaker than it was before. You're missing Yamamoto, who himself claims no Shinigami stronger than him has been born in the last 1,000 years. That's how he was able to rule and consolidate the Gotei 13 for so long, even from a period of total just bloodthirsty mayhem back in the olden days. Yamamoto has managed to hold on to control all that time, and his vice captain Chojiro for 1,000 years as well, incredibly powerful. And the truth of the matter is just that Kyoraku and Nanao don't quite stack up to that. Now, Kyoraku, as a captain commander, is smarter, is more progressive, is more daring, is more new age, and I think that counts for a lot. But in terms of pure military might, I think that they are still missing a lot by not having Yamamoto and Chojiro around, and I don't think Nanao, despite what she pulls off in the 1,000 Year Blood War arc, really measures up either. I think they are really missing the appearance of Captain Unohana as well. Now, Unohana, again, is a difficult one. She was sacrificed for the greater cause, something Kyoraku obviously felt was worthwhile doing, and Kenpachi absolutely reaches new heights of power because of her death. But let's not undersell how strong she was either. She carves up Kenpachi Zaraki hundreds of times before eventually being killed herself. And that was only after being fatigued and wounded herself after presumably days on end worth of fighting. And the Kenpachi that she destroys at the very start of their battle is the same Kenpachi that killed Neutra and the same Kenpachi that helped bring down Yami. So no pushover. And Unohana herself says that she is the strongest Shinigami around apart from Zaraki. So in my opinion, not having her is a serious blow to your military power, but also not having her as a healer as well really brings you down. I'm sure Isane is very skilled, but I can't help but think the 4th division is definitely in a worse place than it was before. Again, Kiyone, the vice captain, is just totally unproven as well. And of course, they are missing Aizen too, one of the most powerful characters in the entire series, with a godlike, unbelievable, unfathomable Reiatsu. He is no longer a part of the Gotei 13 in any official capacity, and I think missing him is another big deal, a big blow. Shinji, again, is powerful, but he's not Aizen. Aizen obviously basically defeating Shinji easily in Fate Karakura Town shows you the real raw difference between them. And then I would say finally as well, there are other characters that the current version of the Gotei is missing. Ukitake. Ukitake is an unproven character in many ways, but there is a lot said about this guy that tells us he was powerful in his own right, being essentially a match for Kyoraku, his kind of brother in arms, but also the fact that his illness meant that he was kind of holding himself together with so much surplus Reiatsu that when he died, the entirety of the Gotei 13's forces that were with him couldn't match his donation, what he was giving in to the Royal Realm Gate they were building. Ukitake's Reiatsu that he was pumping into that, the amount that was missing couldn't be matched again. So that should not be ignored. And I say another character that I think the Gotei 13 is seriously missing is Kisuke Urahara, the former captain of the 12th Division. Now, Mayuri is, of course, extraordinarily capable, and I don't really think they're missing too much by having him as a captain, but there's no denying that Kisuke is kind of on another level in many ways, whether that's his preparations, his planning, his Bankai, all that sort of thing. Kisuke, not having him in the Gotei is a bit of a blow, I would say, to their overall power. The same goes as well for other characters like Gin, other characters like Yoruichi. A lot of captains and a lot of vice captains have fallen by the wayside, retired, died and been replaced, left, betrayed the Gotei, and over the course of the story it has changed a decent amount. The captains lining the hall of the captains' meeting do not look the same as they did at the start of Bleach. And in my opinion, this version of the Gotei is the weakest one for all the reasons I have outlined. Half of the captains are either unproven or, so far at least anyway, shown to be virtually useless. The vice captains are a total mixed bag, with some of them basically carrying the others, and again, so many unproven quantities. And it's just missing vital legacy characters like Aizen, Urahara, Yamamoto, Unohana, characters that really were the core of Soul Society's strength and are now just not around anymore. But that's basically it for this video, guys, on why I think the current Gotei is the weakest of them all. Let me know in the comments below, do you agree with me or not? Do you think there is a weaker version of the Gotei? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please do let me know. Which of the current captains do you think is the weakest? I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Guys, make sure to subscribe if you haven't done already, and until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.